Robert Martens is the author of several books of poetry, the most recent being Finding Home with Silverbow Publications. He lives in Abbotsford, where he enjoys a life as editor and historian, but above all, as a poet. So please, Martin, and if I could just remind everybody else to mute themselves.
Well, I should apologize for my background. It's pretty bare, almost monastic. That's backwards, but that's my new book, Finding Home. I'm so pleased to see Richard here, Richard Olafsson, who did such an immaculate job in my previous books. I'm with Silverbow this time, a little closer to home, a little easier. And it's been good as well. So this book, Finding Home, it begins, I have a refugee background. So literally Canada was a place to find home for my parents and grandparents who fled Soviet Russia in 1926. And things were pretty brutal at the time. A lot of people lost their lives. The ones who stayed were often disappeared into the gulag or executed, whatever, worked to death, as we all know. It's a pretty brutal history. So Finding Home, but it's also, I think it's a book about disconnectedness, as a friend mentioned after you read one or two. What kind of home have we found here in the West? It seems to me that we're always tearing apart from each other, and we're afraid to form communities of any kind. This is a good one, and we're connecting in some way, and I love it. So the book begins with leaving and ends with reclaiming. I'm just going to read one from my ethnic past, which is Mennonite. The first two or three revolve around that. And this is called A Brief Bio. I grew up in Yarrow, British Columbia, a refugee Mennonite village. Hunger is necessary for words, for lament, as the past filters away, vanishes into fog, which is swirling over the dikes today on a chilly January morning, snow threatening, Vedder Mountain as blue as that which can't be spoken. The dikes strengthened after the Great Flood of 1948, another traumatic event in the lives of my Russian refugees after the Holocaust of the Bolshevik Revolution, after fleeing with just enough to survive the day and finding this valley, rainy and warm. A river ran through it, and they built a village, a replica of what they'd lost in Russia, their motherland. My childhood was heavy with their grief, with their bitterness too, and the control that tainted their souls. One way, go this way, they said. Yet we were loved. They were hungry. Embrace found a place there. And today I'm walking the dike that's holding back that flood of grief, and Vedder Mountain with its stone silent gaze, and all those people gone, and memories of the west wind that blew freedom, and farmers in the damp, and grandmothers with shawls, and the minister saying, "Go in peace, you're blessed." I'm kind of changing up here what I'm going to be reading. Trevor read a few things about travel. I've done a lot of backpacking in my time. And are any of you here familiar with the poet Anna Akhmatova, who lived in St. Petersburg? Yeah, incredible lady who managed somehow to survive Stalin. She couldn't publish her poetry It would have meant her death. I visited her home in St. Petersburg, and this is just that story. I was there for 5 days with 2 cousins of mine. My cousins opted for another palace, but I had a pilgrimage to make, and I asked directions at the hotel desk. Anna Akhmatova's house. Rummaging, puzzled looks. Oh, yes, here it is on this map. About 12 blocks. Can we call a taxi? A pilgrimage, though, is for one only, and I walk the Russian streets. Yes, no, I may be lost and ask directions more than once. Some, luckily, spoke English, and there, this must be it, barely noticeable, a passageway into a courtyard green and warm, and found a sign in English, open at 10. A backpacker for years, oh, I was prepared, pulled out a book, read in that leafy silence until a woman walked by, keys in hand, and then another. And how pleased they were to see me, a Canadian tourist who knows our Anna. I was flattered, entered a noiseless, shadowed space, letters, books, dishes, notes, all neatly arranged. I spent an hour there, still feeling the jet lag, trying to take it all in. And how that broken heart moves me. What pain suffused that room, what fierce resistance. A woman who stood in line each day, bread in hand, hoping for contact with her jailed son. As the gulag spread like plague, as her friends memorized her poems, words too dangerous for the page, for frosty air, for streets beaten down by henchmen. She survived Stalin. She betrayed and argued, controlled, wrote lines that were steel hard. I could have loved her. Okay. And here's another, I'm keeping my eye on the clock here. Another travel one. These are really interludes in this book. It does have a kind of progression from beginning to end, but this one's happier. I may have read it to PJ before. Ross Trevor, Northern Ireland. We were there for about 2.5 weeks, stayed at a friend of ours. It's just north of the border. And C.S. Lewis used to vacation there. And for a full week, there was a music festival there in the pubs. Every night till 2:30 in the morning. And it was wonderful. So a happy one. Dark streets. Oh, the Snug. The Snug is what a pub is called in Ireland. They are snug indeed. You're jammed in there, and most people just stand. Dark streets, and the Snug looks closed, but then we hear laughter and the roar of song fueled by Guinness. We knock at the window. It's long past midnight, but the door swings open. A young barkeep beckons us in. Beer and whiskey, guitars and penny whistles. Where are you from, then? Slurs a drunk. Where are you from? The local hero is holding court. His strong, sweet Irish tenor, town of Ross Trevor, the dear best ever. Belfast simmers in my jet-lagged mind. Murals, icons, threats, swagger and black. History is a stone in the belly. The Irish pub is in session. Mandolin, banjo, hand drum, melodies we all know or should know. 3 women represent the younger generation. Merle Haggard yells one, Bruce Springsteen. The redhead does a rap, softened by her Irish lilt. Old tunes again, 4/4, 3/4, broken signatures, all together now. This is your night, take it back. History is butter on the tongue. Teach it to the children, says the local hero. Keep it alive. We will be lost without it. Islands, squalls, ancient ruins, farewells, one more Guinness. A Canadian tune, she yells, and 4 strong winds take us home. Sad and solitary, history has walked by and is waiting. We're leaving, needing a bed. Goodbye to history. Night will echo the green, the Irish march, the guns and songs of Belfast, a snug and a story, a pint and a tune, a threat and a gentle heart. Thank you. Okay, got about, 5 minutes left? I'm going to go right to the back of the book, and this one's a lot more intense. Our daily bread. And it's a little lyric. It's my idea of finding home, of reclaiming what we have lost. I think we all lived at one time, the entire globe, the way I grew up, and the way people still do in small villages. And we have lost a lot of that. So we have to dig out new ways of living. Morning routine as they gather around the breakfast table. Another day, he says, another cliche. He drives the Pilgrim's Freeway, stops at each off-ramp, delivers crystal comfort to the homeless and weary in their underpass shelters. Afternoon falls like fire. He signs off at the office, walks the slums, carries jugs of water to the dying. When he reaches the last exit, he's home again, and they gather around the dinner table. With your permission, he says, I will ask forgiveness. Something I feel I need to do every day. All right. Okay, I'm going to squeeze it, since this is a poets group. There's a one section of the book called Poetic Interlude, rather ironically. And there are about 3 poems there that deal with how poems happen. And this little one is called Behind You. The poem fell behind you while you lingered, while talk and tune diverted you. The poem was conceived in spinning galaxies, spiked and milky at the edge of space-time. The poem was a single quark. It achieved liftoff. It sparked itself through the divine and godless void. It discovered our solar system, entered Earth's atmosphere, took a cloudy breath, fell with a rain, with mud and moss and fog. It settled behind you. It's home. Say hello. Stroke it like a cat. The poem was born in nuclear fire. It's anxious. Treat it gently. Release it behind you. Okay, and one last one. And I'll just interpolate here that you're welcome to a copy. I can put my email address in the chat if you like. Send me your address, maybe $20, whatever you feel you can afford. And e-transfer or check or whatever you feel. So thanks for listening. It's really been a delight. So the meaning of life, this comes out of a men's group that I belong to, and this one's very tongue-in-cheek. But the last 4 lines, I had intended for some very dark lines on page 1 to introduce the book. And my publisher said, no, let's try this, the last 4 lines, and I think it worked so beautifully. The meaning of life. The democratic, polite, and subdued men's group has convened. The men's group has no chair. That would be undemocratic and impolite and unsubdued. We are discussing a book on the meaning of life. The author contends that the pursuit of happiness is superficial, that we should choose instead to pursue meaning. My mind is in orbit. Yes, of course we should pursue meaning. What fools we are, this merry dance of arrested adolescence, chronic entertainment, screens, texts, coaches, and beer, while the wind blows and the sea quakes and earth's fragile heart falters and breaks. But, interjects the senior member of the men's group, what is the point of pursuing meaning if we are unhappy? Today, I will take a nap and drink 2 whiskeys. I will search for meaning tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Robert. And if anybody has questions for Robert, perhaps just put them in the chat. I'd like to say, Robert, the poem Falls Behind You, I thought that was just beautiful. Just wonderful, wonderful poem.
Thank you. Yeah, I stayed away from the denser poems because they're difficult to communicate, especially on Zoom.
And thinking about your idea of home, there was a line that struck me from one of the early poems you read, that home is a replica of what is lost. And I'm wondering if you could speak to how that arises from the immigrant experience, perhaps.
Well, the refugee community that I lived in built a village that was an exact replica of what they had left in Russia. And there are details to that, which I won't bore you with here, but a Russian Mennonite could have walked those streets and thought he was back home, or she. And it was very, very communally built with, farms clustered in the middle. And the workspaces were out somewhere, out beyond, but everyone else lived together. And the church and the school and library, they were all in the middle of town. Absolutely, home is a replica of what we have lost. Perhaps childhood, we have a sense as children, I think, of home, an innate sense of what we need. It takes a village to raise a child. I mean, that's a cliche, but I mean, it's true. And I think I used a line in one of my poems a few years ago, and where I grew up, there was a grandmother ready to embrace you on every corner. And that's how I grew up. First 2 years, my feet hardly touched the ground. And, children are still loved, but, it's a different place now.
Yeah, and it's home as community. It's not just the house you live in, it's the, the whole environment around you as well. And there's a sort of something that happens sometimes with people that emigrate to other countries, that they will often maintain traditions that disappear in the home country. So,
totally. Yeah.
Yeah. So they'll be actually more traditional than the home that they remember. They sort of remember a past version of home that actually doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, the people they left behind were actually beginning to urbanize quite rapidly. There was a mayor, for example, of Ekaterinoslav, which is now Dnipro in Ukraine. For example, it was becoming quite common. Yeah.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Robert.